I recorded a video for this character a couple hours ago, but unfortunately we already made the build better. So here you have it. This is my favorite build that I've played so far after about 48-ish hours into the league. I know that sounds a little bit cliche, but at the very beginning of the league, I tried about 12 different things. My character started as a level 100 Rune Master. We leveled them up ahead of time and then she clicked on the mastery. And day one, we just kind of waffled all over the place, experimenting with lots and lots of different setups, builds, unique items, and combinations of things. On day 2 or so, we settled on this particular build, and it has skyrocketed since then. It has become super, super strong. Lots of itemization options. We can level as it, we can play a mid game with it, and we have excellent itemization options and chase items for LP later in the game if you really want to dig your teeth into this build. So the first thing you should know before I even tell you this is in the description of this video. You will find 3 different build planners for different levels of the build. We'll talk about those during the video itself, but those are there when you want them after the video is done. So the build is this. We're playing Frostbite. We are playing Frostbite with a brand new skill called Frost Claw. Frost Claw is a skill that you get around level 12 as a mage, and it's just added in this patch. It has lots of little synergies in it and little things that you can use it for, but it happens to be a cold skill by default, and it has Frostbite chance built into it. It does not have many more multipliers at first glance. In fact, if you type in the word more, you only see 1 or 2 more multipliers across the whole skill. There are some other things that can mechanically change the skill to make it deal more damage. For example, there's a node down here called Volley of Glass that allows it to hit the same target with the projectile in exchange for giving up the AoE burst damage. So we have 5 projectiles, all 5 of them hit. We're going to look all over our build for different more multipliers where we can pick them up. We're going to stack tons of cast speed, and we'll have synergies across the board for stacking up lots of ward, lots of damage reduction, and I guess that's it. Lots of ward, lots of damage reduction, and an incredible amount of damage. For those of you who already play a lot of Last Epoch, you'll remember that ailments were nerfed in the past 1 or 2 patches. There's a big overhaul where ailment effect was removed from the game, and the ailment effect was transferred into ailment penetration. So since then, ailments have been a little bit weaker than they used to be, especially meme builds were really hit. You couldn't just force your warpath to be a poison build anymore. But this skill has really overperformed in terms of damage. When I am standing at the dummy in town, my biggest tick that I've had happen so far, so not DPS, but the tick that you see pop up, has been about 850,000 damage, which is a tremendously high number for an ailment build to be ticking in town against the dummy. So I'm very happy with the offense and defense, the playability, the quality of life, the end game scaling. I'm a big fan of this build. So I'm going to walk you through a build planner, and I'll show you what the beginning of this build is that you can play from the very get-go, and then we'll talk about how you can scale this build up to get to a point where I am right now. A couple key features of the build that I don't want to forget about, so I'm going to mention them at the very beginning of the build. As we glance here, we have some new stuff that's been added in the 0.9.2 patch. One of those things is this. We have a node in the Rune Master Mastery. It's called Mental Catalysis. Reduced bonus damage from crits while using a catalyst. It's 48 at this, just with the 6 points here. And we also have new affixes available on your gear. You can get it on a helmet, you can get it on gloves, I think. You can get it on body armor. But you can build less bonus damage taken from critical strikes. And it stacks up to 100 and reduces all the bonus damage, and you can get the crits from an enemy downgraded into normal hits. So you could build 80, 90, or even 100 less bonus damage taken from critical strikes, or you could build crit avoid. So you have a lot of options when it comes to a mage these days. You can use a helmet and a body armor that have that crit avoidance implicit, which is excellent. Or you could have the option of flexing and using more gear that drops on the ground, maybe using things that have a different implicit, and then maybe instead of building crit avoidance, you could rely on this and use a catalyst and have 1 or 2 affixes of the same thing across your gear in order to help mitigate crits. This is very interesting. I'm happy that it's in the game. Another thing that I want to mention real quick is you're going to see that we have a lot of damage reduction in this game. A lot of damage reduction in Rune Master. We have the normal Flame Ward stuff, which is hit-based, and Ele-based. We have damage reduction from Flame Rush here. This is all damage reduction doubled against damage over time, and then extended in duration. In Runic Invocation, you will see that we have a 30% less damage taken from this permanently. From Ice Barrage on the very far left side, we have less cold damage taken, along with a shield that blocks projectiles. And then in Frostclaw, it's not quite damage reduction, but we do have a tremendous source of ward gained on cast. And then we have a little bit of ward gained on our skill use from a Twisted Heart, and a ward gained on freeze. We got a lot of ward synergies across the build. So I think it's right not to use a shield on this build. If you want to use a shield, that's on you, but I am very, very happy with the performance of this build offensively and defensively using a Catalyst here. The reason that I mentioned the less damage taken is I think the very highest end of this build, less damage taken from the Oracle Amulet here, is an important way to continue to mitigate damage, because less damage taken from damage over time, you are weak to damage over time. One of the biggest things that mitigates damage over time is Leech, and we're a ward build, so we don't have Leech. I think this one right here is very important. So for the build itself, we're playing Frostclaw, we're playing Frostbite. Frostbite builds have some normal looking components here. From the very beginning of this build, from the get-go, I would recommend using Frostbite Shackles, and I would recommend using Snowdrift. Snowdrift oftentimes feel good only when you have movement speed on them. But for this build here, you get to zip around using your Flame Rush. You attack for a little bit, you zip around with Flame Rush, you attack for a little bit, you zip around with Flame Rush, and even if you don't have movement speed on your Snowdrifts, or you're unfortunate like I am, and you just hit the wrong modifier, this build still feels good to play. And I think that's really important, because the quality of life of this build feels great. So, you'll have Frostbite Shackles, someday you'll get LP on them, and we're going to talk about the base version of the build in the first build planner here. So to scale our Frostbite damage with our Frostbite Shackles and our Snowdrift Boots, we're going to build a whole bunch of elemental damage over time and freeze rate multiplier. Why freeze rate multiplier? Well, take a look at your boots. We have 2 cold penetration with Frostbite per 10 freeze rate multiplier. In my endgame build, I'm getting about 250, 260 penetration just by building freeze rate multiplier. This means that I don't need cold pen on my amulet, and I don't need cold shred from my blessings. So this is an excellent way of scaling damage. It's why we use Snowdrifts. They're very, very strong. So a lot of our prefixes will be elemental damage over time and freeze rate multi. I don't think that you need the freezing concoction prefix on your belt, so I've opted into recommending both cold damage and elemental damage over time. Seems great just to get the percent increase damage. We have a basic looking relic. In fact, the Rune Quill is not the only one with elemental damage over time here. You could even use the Elder Eye, which has some cold damage, chill on hit, and freeze rate multi. And remember, freeze rate multi is beneficial to you. So for here, you will have some cast speed, some elemental damage over time, and you'll see similar modifiers across the board. Freeze rate multi, Ele dot, freeze rate multi, cast speed, Ele dot, those sorts of things. We do want a bunch of Frostbite on hit. So we have Frostbite on our helmet, Frostbite on our chest piece, as much as possible, exalted if we can. And you'll see on our amulets, this is the one chance where we get to start exploring the new stuff that Rune Master offers to us. We have Armor Shred on hit, and normally Armor Shred does nothing for ailments and nothing for damage over time. But of course, in Rune Master, we have a brand new node called Freezing Points. You put 7 points into this, and it says your Armor Shred chance is converted to Frostbite chance for cold spells, which is a really big deal. Take a look at the Armor Shred chance that you get at tier 6 is 176 here. If I show you what Ignite looks like, the tier 6 Ignite goes up to 54. Less than a third of what you can get out of Armor Shred. The fact that this is available is a big deal. If you have 2 LP Frostbite Shackles, oh my god. Whew. But you could put both cast speed and Armor Shred, and you'd be feeling so good about your build. So the fact that Armor Shred is a relevant modifier for us is something that you need to know about. Ideally, your idols would be something like this, something like Frostbite on cold hit, Frostbite on cold hit, Frostbite on cold hit, and then you'll farm up a Throne of Ambition to get the more cold damage and more armor while you're fighting single target bosses. Things like Julra, right? So this is what you're looking for. As you start to min-max your build, you're going to make some progress. And we'll talk about that in just a moment here. But first things first, let's talk about the skills themselves. In Frostclaw, we're going to have a handful of more multipliers. We're going to make our Frostbite last longer with this 1 pointer over here. And we will be taking the node on the very bottom right for Volley of Glass, which is going to increase our mana cost. We're going to get the mana cost as low as we can, but the basic version of this build is using a wand, and we're still going to have like a 3-ish mana cost on our Frostclaw, which means that we will be consuming mana. If we run out of mana and we go negative, we can't use Frostclaw anymore. So that's a big limiting factor for the basic version of this build. But to complement this, we're going to use Flame Rush. Flame Rush will proc some Static Orb. And Static Orb is nice because it has some Frostbite conversion built into it. So our Shock will apply Frostbite instead. And it'll make you nice and tanky because you'll get access to Lightning Ages for 8 seconds. So you will zip around the map using your Flame Rush. Your Static Orb will give you nice and tankiness here. And in order to make your mana as good as possible, I've included the Ball Lightning node. This is how I level. It made my mana feel nice and good. It kind of removes some of the fun of having a bunch of spiral orbit static orbs around your character, but it also makes the mana tremendously more manageable. So I think this is what you want to do. If you can manage without it, go ahead. The rest of this build, what you'll see here, Runic Invocation, we have a very important node. This is the capstone skill for being a Rune Master. It's something that you get around level 20 or level 15 whenever you actually become a Rune Master. Okay, Runic Invocation. This skill here with Runic Invocation, it's called Immutable Order. Instead of the runes above your head, depending on what skills you've been casting, the runes above your head depend on the skills on your bar, your QWE, if you have default key bindings on your skill. So for us, we're going to be using Cold, Fire, Cold, Snap Freeze, the default Flame Ward, and Flame Rush will be converted to Cold for us. And that gives us a Rowan's Frost Guard. I think I can show you what this is if I show you just in game real quick. You can hover over this and you can zoom in and read if you'd like to, but it gives you 30% less damage taken against everything, including damage over time. It also gives you a burst of ward, which scales with intelligence, and some ward per second, which scales with intelligence. We can have permanent uptime of this, and we're going to have 30% less damage taken. It's incredible. On the one hand, if there were a Runic Invocation that supported Frostbite, you might be interested in that. But there's not really a good one, so we're just using Runic Invocation in order to pick up this node, the Immutable Order, and in order to have 30% less damage taken. If you didn't spec into Runic Invocation, you wouldn't have this node. There's a lot of fluff in this skill tree. It doesn't really do too much. Gives us cast speed, some cooldown, but really the Immutable Order node is important enough for us to get this 30% less damage taken that I think it's excellent. I'm happy to have it here. Flame Ward, if you've seen one Flame Ward skill tree, if you've seen all of them, you take all the less damage taken modifiers and you take the +1 charge on the very top right of the skill tree. Walking through the mastery, we're going to go mastery, the gear, the blessings, and the idols. And then after we do all that, it'll be very quick to jump into the second version of the build, and then my version, the third version of the build. So for the mastery itself, we're not really building much health. We have lots and lots of ways of generating ward, so we don't care about the little 1-pointers for health unless they have something else that goes along with them. We have intelligence, we have damage, we have cast speed. Moving on. When you get to like level 95 or so, the skill points that you spec into are not amazing. There are some flexible points that you could be picking up and some extra penetration if you want, but I think these the elemental res and the elemental damage are pretty good for early game. And if you can spec out of them someday, go ahead, but I like having these, they're fine. In the Sork skill tree, we're picking up as much cast speed as we can. We have some intelligence nodes. We're not a spell crit build, but nothing else here is particularly good for us, so just a little bit of intelligence. And then a couple points into our Cryomancer. So the defining thing here is gives us cold damage or freeze or multi. These are not mandatory points. If you only wanted to go Arcane Momentum and then cut these 8 points and these 5 points, you could. Once we get to the end game version of this build, this will make more sense to you. But first things first. The cast speed's important. Let's move to the Rune Master skill tree. In Rune Master, we have a less damage taken modifier from Sphere of Protection. It's excellent. Every single mage build should be picking this up. We have some extra cast speed. If our skill costs 0 mana, somehow, this would be relevant as well. But basically, it's got cast speed on it. So we're clicking on it and we're very happy. Next up, we have some intelligence, some ward gain on spellcast, intelligence here. We have some chill chant, sure. And then the important node that we already talked about, the conversion for armor shred. Some of the last points we pick up, I'm not in love with these points, but I think you have room to fit them in the build. And getting above 400 ward retention, I do think is an important thing. If you're not using a scepter, I don't think these are important. So for the very basic version of this build, we're not going to use inscribed instruments. But later on, when we do use a scepter, we will spec into these. Other nodes that you could spec into could be the extra chill to the bone for cold penetration or some extra % increased damage. But really, after like level 95 or so, there's a couple points that become flexible, so you can use them wherever you want to use them. But let's take a look at Decree to the Burning Wind. We do have a Ra rune, so we can double this. Remember, Ra is a fire, and we are cold, fire, cold. So we can double this. This is 16% more damage to bosses and rares. It's a fine node if you have some extra points to spec into. And And then importantly, at the very top, we have cooldown recovery speed per intelligence, which is great. And then we have some extra elemental penetration with damage over time. Not insane, given that you're probably going to have 200 or even 250% penetration. So this is not game changing, but it's fine. So that's the mastery. We talked about the gear a little bit. We talked about the fact that the basic version of this build will be using a wand, specifically because it has the -3 mana cost there. And we talked about the kind of modifiers you're looking for. For our blessings, the important things here, we're going to use our first blessing for Void Res. We don't really need anything else. We're not dealing spell damage, so we're not leeching. We're not a crit multi-build, so just Void Res is perfect. For our Lagan blessing, we have cold damage. We have all res. We have so much penetration already that we do not need chance to shred cold res on hit. And instead, Frostbite on hit is much, much better for us. And then lastly, some flat armor. Endurance is not a good blessing here because we're not going to build much flat life. We're only going to have like 12, 13, 14, 15-ish 100 life. And you'll see that as you continue playing this character, you'll have 8, 9, 10, 15,000 ward. So armor is much more useful to cover that ward than endurance because you don't have much life there. So that is the basic version of the build. Let's talk about why this build becomes more interesting the more you spec into it. So I mentioned that we have a wand for the minus mana cost, and we have a mana cost on Frostclaw, and a couple little things that could benefit us if we got the mana cost low enough. So how can we get the mana cost low enough? If we could use a scepter that has a tier 7 modifier on it, all of a sudden we have a 0 mana cost on our Frostclaw, and we can scale our cast speed through the moon, and we can even find other things to do with our mana now that it's not being strained by our Frostclaw. So this is the biggest change here. Not too much that you'll see, but now that we're using Scepter, now that we have the -7 mana cost, we do need points in Sork. These are no longer flexible because we need to pick up Ice Barrage. At this point, hopefully you have idols that give you Lightning Aegis when you are hit. This scales up to 30% chance when you are hit if they are max rolled. And if you have Lightning Aegis, you no longer need Static Orb to give you Lightning Aegis. So when we have Lightning Aegis, we don't need Static Orb. We can put 1 point from our Frostclaw, not 2, not 3, because you really don't need it because you're casting so quickly. 1 point into Power Word Hail. And the 1 point here is going to proc our Ice Barrage. It doesn't proc multiple, it only procs 1. If you proc another one while you have one active, it just makes a new one. But our Ice Barrage is going to do a number of different things for us here. For our Ice Barrage, it's going to give us 20% more damage from the Frost armor on the far left of the tree. This also gives us less cold damage taken, which is cute. And it blocks projectiles, which is cute, but not the reason we're taking it, and just cute. We have some nodes over here. Pierce is fine, but it takes a lot of points. Instead of speccing the points into Pierce, we have a couple more multipliers. We have Shatter, which is not as good as Pierce, but it kind of does the job. And we have some points in the top middle of the Ice Barrage skill tree that give us cast speed per stack. This is a great way of juicing some extra cast speed into your build. Cast speed gives you damage. It gives you ward based on your skills on Frostclaw. You see that when you cast it, you gain ward. And when you cast it, you gain ward based on your freeze rate multiplier. And we're building freeze rate multiplier because that is part of our damage from Snowdrift Boots. So we talked about the simple build and we talked about the mid-tier build. What about the end game build? Take a look at these items here. You're going to see a lot of them become unique items. So what can we do? With these unique items, we can get a lot more damage out of our character. A Frozen Ire, for example, has freeze rate multi and percent cold damage on it already. It also has a proc of that chance to cast Tundra Nova on hit with cold skills. And that Tundra Nova is a cold spell. And it hits. So it applies Frostbite, and then it also applies all of the percent increased damage and more damage that goes along with that. So this is a great thing to have here, if we can make it happen. A Crest of Unity. I suspect that this is a helmet that you'll see pop up in a number of builds. It has a lot of text that you can quite frankly ignore. The very bottom line of text is less damage taken from ignited, shocked, and chills enemies. This is a great source of less damage taken, and we don't really need much on our helmet. We're not going out of our way to build a bunch of health. You could try to get armor on this as well. If you had 2 LP, I think double prefixes with cold damage over time and Frostbite on cold hit would be great. But this is a great thing that we could include in our build. You know, we have a lot of ward. And we have enough leech in this version of the build because we're going to extend the Sork skill tree into the 1.5 cold damage leech's health. As our damage gets better and better, this 1.5 leech is actually good enough that we can make pretty good use of Twisted Heart. Even if you aren't leeching back to full, it still gives you +1 to all of your skills. It still gives you strength, which is armor, which is awesome. And then it even gives you some extra cast speed. The health is relevant because it helps convert more of your health into ward whenever you're casting a skill. It's absurd. This is a very, very good item. And there's a reason that high-end max or like min-maxed builds in Last Epoch tend toward items like this because Twisted Heart is so strong. So I have 2 modifiers here. I don't expect you to get double tier 7. This is just the kind of thing that you look for on a Twisted Heart. Tier 7 Ele Dot, awesome. Tier 7 +4 levels to Frostclaw would be very, very good. It gives you access to another more multiplier on the Frostclaw skill tree, and you'll have at least 1200 ward. My build currently walks around with about 14,000 ward. So this is 6% more damage per point. Times 3, it's about 18% more damage. Very happy to take that. So I think that about does it. We talked about a lot of different things here. I wasn't planning on giving you 3 different build planners, but I think there's really 3 differences of what you can do with this build. With the wand, when your mana still matters and you can't use Ice Barrage. If you try to use Ice Barrage with a wand here, you will be negative mana and you will wonder why your build doesn't function. You can't use Ice Barrage if you only have a wand. But once you have the tier 7 modifier, the build really takes off. You start using Ice Barrage, you start layering all those defenses, and it's absurd. It's so much more damage and so much tankier. It's so easy to play too. It's very much so surprised me with the damage output and how good it feels. If you have any questions about this build, if you're playing Frostbite, if you're playing Crit Frostclaw or Ignite Frostclaw or Shock Frost, no, that's not really a thing. I would love to see what you're doing with the skill. There are so many things to explore with Rune Master and with like these skills that have multiple conversions and Runic Invocation. I'm so happy that every time that somebody tells me that they're exploring something and they really like what their build is, it's different. We've talked to so many people playing Rune Master at the beginning of the 092 patch, and everyone seems to be excited about a different thing. Awesome. I couldn't be happier. Let me know how your builds are going. I have some big memes that I'm working on in the background. We'll see how it goes. I'm going to keep working on this. We're going to farm some, some Crest of Unity with LP. Maybe we'll get some different LP on our Twisted Heart here. Maybe 2 LP on the Frostbite Shackles. But I'm really enjoying this build, so I'm probably going to play this for a few more days. In any case, thanks for being here. It's a long video, but I'll see you next time.